Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's interest session. It will be on creating web applications with C-Sharp and ASP.NET. I am Dr. Mike Nizick, the director of the ETIC, where these programs originate from. And we're going to get going on our topic for today. Okay, so welcome to interest and welcome to the ETIC at New York Tech. Just give you a quick kind of background a little bit on the ETIC. We are a business incubator for our students. We are an innovating center for new prototypes. We run a number of different programs for students that engage them in technology, introduce them to new technologies, and kind of help them to move on their way into their career. Okay, so I welcome you to visit us at nyit.edu/ETIC, learn a little bit more about our programs, our facilities, and what we do for our students at New York Tech. Let's move into our topic for today, creating web applications with C-Sharp and ASP.NET. These are both Microsoft products. The reason we host these interest sessions, interest stands for New York Tech's ETIC Remote Engagement Sessions in Technology. I know, a mouthful, but that is our interest program. Interest was created to introduce our students to proprietary technologies that they may not be exposed to directly in their classes because of the proprietary nature of the tech, but there's a lot of jobs out there that are available for these specific technologies. So we introduce these technologies, we give a background and demonstration of how these technologies work, we explain where to download these technologies for free. They're available to all developers and students to work with on a demonstration basis to learn them so that you can apply them in industry. You know, we basically give you a demo of the technology to get you going in that area. Okay, so today we'll get going on our topic and we'll move forward. Okay, so a little background on our session, the way we're going to run it today. We're going to talk a little bit about career opportunities for .NET, C-Sharp, web application design. So a little bit about the language background as far as where the C-Sharp language kind of comes from and where it fits in with the other programming languages. Talk about tier development, tier 1, 2, and 3, 1 tier, 2 tier, and 3 tier development, software development applications and how they differ and why they're all needed, but why there's career opportunities in each one of those. So a Visual Studio as an IDE and integrated development environment specifically. Talk about creating projects that are ASP.NET and web-based projects. We'll talk about the ASP.NET framework and C-Sharp as a language. Okay, so we'll get going on our topic for today for our interest session. As a reminder, interest is our New York Tech's ETIC Remote Engagement Sessions in Technology. Interest was designed to introduce you to proprietary technologies like Microsoft in this case that may not be covered in your classes, but that there are a ton of jobs out there that people are looking for specific proprietary technologies for you to apply your theoretical and hands-on experience that you gain at New York Tech. In this case, Microsoft has a platform of products that are web-based application design products for called C-Sharp as its language and ASP.NET as its framework. So today's interest session is on those topics. So let's talk a little bit about the session that we're going to kind of go through today. We're going to talk a little bit about career opportunities for you in web application and web design and C-Sharp coding. We're going to talk a little bit about the language background, the origins of C-Sharp, but also where it fits into the other kind of series of languages that are out there currently. We're going to talk about tier development, 1 tier, 2 tier, and 3 tier development of applications, where they differ, why they're all needed, and why there's job opportunities in each. Today we'll be talking about 3 tier development, which is really where a lot of the stuff today gets created in that third tier. So about Visual Studio as an IDE or an integrated development environment. We're going to build applications in Visual Studio. It's the #1 IDE today, most widely used. We do have a separate interest session on Visual Studio alone, but today we'll be using it to develop the application and the demo. We'll talk about creating projects, new projects, talk about the ASP.NET platform and the framework, the .NET framework, and then the C-Sharp language and how to interact with that framework. We'll talk about creating web forms, talk about creating code behind the objects that are in the web forms. We'll talk about configuring a web server so that you can host your application so the world can see it and run it. And then we'll talk about publishing your project from your local machine up to your web server so that the world can kind of use it. And then we'll talk about accessing and running your project from a browser, really from phone, tablet, or computer. Okay, and that'll be our session for today. So let's talk about C-Sharp.NET as a career. If you look, just a quick search on Indeed, we're looking at about 28,000 jobs in this kind of C-Sharp area. C-Sharp is not just a web application. Today's session is on web applications, but we can design desktop applications with console applications, services, data interfaces, all kinds of things with C-Sharp. So as a C-Sharp developer, you can see that there's a wonderful opportunity to make a very, very lucrative living. And again, in many ways, for many of you, life-changing, so that you can kind of begin your career and make advancements through your career, the more experience you get. The one thing I usually do in these seminars is try to explain a few things when you look at job postings and job ads. In this case, if you look at this 3 to 5 year piece they always talk about, that's called a senior developer, right? So don't think when you see senior, you have to have 20 years experience. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about they want enough experience for you to show that you can kind of be assigned a task and follow that task through to a finished product. If you can do that, you meet that 3 to 5 year requirement. Usually they want you to be in industry, which is harder because you're getting started. But if you can build up the technology skill sets to build an application from what they ask you to do and to move through, you'll qualify for a lot of these positions. So these sessions are geared to introduce you to the technology, to the career opportunities, but also to show you how to get started. Okay, so I want to make sure that you know that today's session is also for you to kind of get going and get started. So this is a good viewpoint, a good view into what kind of career you could have with this single technology called C-Sharp and web application development and things like that. Okay, let's talk about languages. When we talk about programming languages, we program in a language and we write directions to the computer to process, compile into machine code called object code, and then it runs it, right? It's a binary file that it runs, and it knows it's an executable, and then it runs it, and it does what we tell it to do. There are all kinds of programming languages that exist that have different syntax and different formats, but overall they do the same things, right? Once you learn, like in computer science or information systems, once you learn in school the concepts of, variables and conditionals and loops and data structures and attaching to external files and things like that. Once you learn all that, every language has the exact same thing. They just do it a little bit differently, right? And those languages get favored in some way or another, which is why they become popular in their own field. Some become popular in robotics, some become popular in web design, some become popular for desktop design, some become popular because they're system agnostic and they can be run on all different operating systems, so they become popular. But overall, each one has its own flavor and they become popular for certain reasons. If you look at the top programming languages, you'll see C-Sharp's down there on the list. And there's reasons for that. I want to explain that. So you see JavaScript, Python, Java, C, C++, PHP, Swift. Swift and C-Sharp are proprietary languages, right? Swift is for Apple, for phone design, for app design, and C-Sharp is Microsoft's version of C, right? So it's a Microsoft version of C. So if you know C and you know C++ and you know Java, the C family of languages, you already kind of know C-Sharp. But C-Sharp attaches to the .NET framework. The .NET framework, which is a Microsoft platform, again, gives you all kinds of cool things you could do in a web application, in a desktop application, in a console application. And because that framework exists, and because the C-Sharp language is a Microsoft-focused product, the C-Sharp language attaches to the Microsoft .NET framework, which attaches to all the things that it could do, building web applications, building phone applications, building tablet applications, building desktop applications, building console applications, building services, building REST APIs, right? All these different things that you could do are so much easier, and they put you into something called a RAD, a Rapid Application Development Environment, so that you could build these applications really quickly, okay? That is why Microsoft produced their products this way. If you look on some of the jobs you saw, there was tons and tons of jobs out there because many organizations adopt this platform for their own internal development to streamline all their operations, okay? If you look at the languages above, JavaScript, Python, Java, they're all cross-platform, right? They're all system agnostic, and they're all open source. So when you start a company, when you build a new technology, when you're working in a higher ed environment, in a research lab and things like that, you don't want to take on licensing fees. Those languages become extremely popular and extremely important because you want to build applications with tech that's going to be, able to be distributed free of charge, things like that. When you're building internal applications or even commercial applications to focus clients, you want to build them fast, you want to build them accurate, you want to build them really robust with feature-rich content, and that's why you pick a platform like Microsoft many times, okay? So the point I'm making here is that there's a bunch of different languages. They all focus off of the same core techniques and methodologies we use in computer science in general. Each one has its own little flavor, its own syntax of putting these things together. but each one specializes in its area. Microsoft specializes in really robust, rapid application design profiles, and a lot of projects and a lot of companies are hiring for this, which is where you see those 28,000 jobs at any given point in time. So let's talk about tier application or tier development. So whenever we build a program, that program is either running on a single phone where the data and the application, everything else is on the phone, is on the tablet, is on the desktop. It's all running. If we buy a new digital scale, we have to attach to it. We attach through a USB, and we use a piece of software that attaches to the USB. 8 million people all around the globe don't need to use that. I attach my Fitbit, and I use this piece of software to control my Fitbit. 8 billion people or 8 million people around the world don't need to use it at the same time, right? So you build it in a one-tier application. Incredibly useful, incredibly needed, but it doesn't allow you to roll things out to millions of people at the same time. When we talk about two-tiered architecture, right, that's the one-tier architecture. When we talk about two-tiered architecture, we're talking about client server. We're building an application to sit on a workstation to attach to all the local drives and all that, and printers and all this stuff, and scanners and everything else on the local machine. But when it actually uses and works with and stores data, it's saving it on the server. So the database is sitting remotely in the intranet somewhere. It's sitting somewhere on the organization's network. So that server and that database is sitting there. So you have a client and a server, and they're talking to each other. That's two-tier. When we want a cloud-based system, and we want, again, millions and millions of people to access our system, when we want to update 8 million users at one time, without updating all their machines, we have to go to a three-tier environment. We have to have the data layer, the application layer, and the presentation layer, all three of them running on the same platform at the same time, okay? Now, there's pros and cons. One is that if you make a really bad mistake, you bring 8 million people down at once. But if you make one really cool enhancement, 8 million people get it all at once. And if you have 6,000 complaints and bugs that are existing in your software and you make that change once, you just solved 6,000 issues at one time. Anybody who's worked with two-tier or client server or even one-tier, when you make that application change to fix the enhancement, whatever, to keep your customer happy, you have to roll that out to all those users. Okay, if you have 10,000 users, you got to roll it out to 10,000 users. 5,000 get it, 5,000 wait to do the install, 5,000 are still complaining, 5,000 are happy, right? It's really cumbersome. The issue right now is that, there's still a need for those things, and they still will be around for a long time because they serve a really good and strong purpose. But the majority of all organizations, when they build an application, they don't want to run it on a server in-house anymore. They don't want to take up that cost, the electric, the cost of maintaining it, cost of hiring somebody to take care of that server. They want to put it up on a server in the web. They want to run it from anywhere. They want to run it from their car, from their phone, from their tablet. They want it to run on every system at once, meaning Mac, Windows, Linux. They don't want to, that's what they want. So when you go for a job and you try to build your career up with these types of technologies, they want to see that you understand that, and they want to see that you know how to build it. So today, we're talking about building three-tier technologies, right? The data layer, the application layer, and the presentation layer all exist on one server on the internet. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be building a new project, and that project is going to involve a web form that's going to show up on anybody's browser. It's going to involve some objects and some components that we're going to place inside the form that's going to make it look more like a program and operate more like a program that you'd be used to installing, iTunes or something like that. We're going to have that code, we're going to write code that's going to manipulate those objects behind the scenes, just like a program would be, but it's going to be running in a browser. So we're going to be building a tier 3 application today that's going to solve some sort of a basic problem. We're probably going to add two numbers together or something simple. But essentially, we're going to build that web application. We're going to make it look kind of nice. We're going to have it operate behind the scenes in a coding fashion. And then we're going to publish it to an actual website. And I'm going to show you how to actually access that from the web, which means that we're going to create a project today that's actually going to be published so that we can access it from, again, anybody in the world could access it once we publish it. It'll be a good demonstration of how this all works and gets put together. And also of what companies and organizations looking to hire somebody in a .NET development position is looking for them to understand and looking for them to demonstrate. Okay, so let's move into creating projects and discussing web forms and code behind and all that, okay? Now we're gonna get into our demonstration. Okay, let's get into our demonstration now. Okay, so now let's get into our demonstration. We'll talk about creating projects, working with the .NET framework, creating forms, and publishing your project. Okay, we're going to get into the demo now for C# and .NET development. Okay, so just like any other development environment, I mean, any type of desktop or workstation that you'll be working at, we're going to start a program. In this case, we're going to start a program called Visual Studio 2017, but you can get a more recent version if you want. But one thing I wanted to point out was Visual Studio Community is a version of Visual Studio that's completely free and downloadable. You don't have to be a student or anything like that. Microsoft wants you to use these tools for your own development applications, so you learn them so that you can help industry, right, adopt it as their platform. So it's a great business model, and it's great for you because you get to download things for free and learn about them and practice with them. And then when you go for the job interview, you can actually design, you actually design something from scratch using Visual Studio. So do not hesitate once this session is over to make sure you get Visual Studio Community version. And by the way, everything, the way they did it at Microsoft is that everything that you can do in community that's free is able to be done in the professional version, which is extremely costly for a software company to bring on. But the professional version allows their programmers to work in an agile environment, sharing code and things like that, which the community version doesn't do exactly all the things that it does. So download the free version, get your hands on, practice and experience with it. And then when you go into industry, you won't see any change at all. There's not one version than the other. Okay, so let's get started. This is Visual Studio. You can see it works just like any other kind of program with menus and things like that. The first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create a project. So we're going to create a new project. That project is going to be an ASP.NET project. Okay, the reason we're doing this today for this demo is we're talking about C# and web applications. So we have to design a project that's not a console app, that's not a Windows form desktop app. We have to create a product that's going to be able to be run in the cloud off of a web server. Right? So from start, we're building a totally new kind of project, different type of project. And what you'll see is you'll see in our Visual C# area here, and in our web area here, we're going to build one of two projects. One is going to be a core project, and two is going to be a .NET project, right? So the core project is when we're going to build a really basic level web system that we don't need a lot of the other components for. Today, we're going to build a user interface and all that, so we need to build the ASP.NET web application using a .NET framework. So we're going to choose that option, okay? The .NET framework, to give you an explanation of that keeps on getting updated and upgraded every time you do a Windows update. Similar to using Java, and you import in different packages that have different classes that have different methods that allow you to do things, right? You would import in java.util.stack to operate as the stack data structure, something like that. .NET is those packages, right? So .NET allows us to bring in all these different pieces and use all these different components of the framework to make these really, very quickly, by the way, these really robust, impressive apps. The .NET framework allows us to do that. All right, so just think about it like similar to like the Java packages where you're importing stuff in and you have access to all these different tools I'm going to show you here. They're accessing that from this framework that allows you to run on a Windows 10 machine or a Windows server or something. So we're going to just call this my test, and I'll call it my demo, right? So my application is going to be called my demo, but we're not going to create an executable called my demo in this case because this is a web-based application that needs to run on the server in the browser, okay? So this is going to create a bunch of files that we need to do that as we go through it. And we're going to create a .NET application called my demo. We're going to click OK. It's going to ask us what type of web application we want to create. Now we can create a whole bunch of different things, a single page application, an Azure application, an empty one. I like to use web forms. Model View Controller is fantastic and used in industry, but it's a little more clinical and technical where you're building the model and you're interacting with the model and then you're seeing the changes in your web design, okay? And web forms is a little more creative. It's a little more artsy. We can kind of like build things a little bit more in line with just kind of an ad hoc app that we're building today. So I'm going to use the web forms piece, okay? And generally what we do is we build a web forms application, and one web form is called another, and we pass information through, okay, from one web form to another. If we go to our Solution Explorer over here, what we've created is we've actually created a very basic, right, just by choosing the web application, we've actually created a very basic website. So this My Demo property, this My Demo package and project has all these different pages already created for us from scratch. As a matter of fact, if I brought up, this is the site master page. if I brought up a browser, we compile just like we do in an application, but really the way we do that is we load our browser. So if we wanted to see what this program looked like before we ever got started, we would basically just go to a Google Chrome drop down here, okay? And it's going to basically compile everything. It tells us it tells us if there's any errors. It tells us just like we would do in Java or like Eclipse or NetBeans as an IDE. But instead of bringing up the program like in a runtime environment, it's bringing up a browser, right? Because we're building a web application that we want to be able to view in a browser on a phone, tablet, or desktop anywhere in the world. So this is basically bringing up, okay, this is the basic form that it put together. So Visual Studio already created a little bit of a shell for us to go to kind of home, about, contact, right? And if you notice, it's got kind of a home page that's staying here, and it's changing all these subpages down here. So right away, .NET has, in this rapid application design and development environment, has created some base level stuff for us to work with. So the first thing we want to do is if we open up, look at some of these pages, right? If we go to the site master page, right? The design, right? If you notice here, what we're seeing, it should look very similar to you. It's ASP.NET coding, but it's very similar to HTML, right? We've got tags, you've got all kinds of different sections here. We got an HTML section, we got a header section. It's really HTML, but it's ASP active server page, ASP code, which allows the browser to interact with the code a little bit more dynamic. So if we look at this code, we can kind of get an idea of what's happening here, and it's bringing in a lot of JavaScript packages and stuff like that, and get that. But it's easier for us to just see what's going on. So what we do in Visual Studio is we just go to the design piece, and this kind of shows us what's going on up here, right? So if I wanted to change, right, my application name to, to my demo, right, I can work right in the screen and make those changes. Okay, so if I wanted to bring up one of my pages as far as this project goes, and I bring up Site Master, this is the main form, whereas the header or the title bar is going to always stay there, but all the pages underneath are going to change. And I'll show you how we add new pages to keep that bar in there in a little bit. But basically, if we're looking at the code here, we're looking at ASP.NET code or ASP code active server page. It's very similar to HTML, right? We're bringing in references, and we've got tags and all kinds of stuff, and sections and headers, and we're bringing in JavaScript packages here and stuff. So very, very similar to what we already know in HTML, but with active server page, it lets you interact with the browser a little bit more robust manner. In Visual Studio, when we're looking at this particular code, we can kind of visualize what's happening here, but we go to design, and it'll bring up the design right inside that piece. So if I wanted to change my application name as an example, and I wanted to call this application name, I wanted to call this my demo app, we're changing it right inside of the application, and we can change this this footer down here to okay. And what'll happen is that working right in the design piece, when I go to the source code, all of those are changed as well. So you can work right in the code just like you would normally, but being able to jump right to the design page makes it a little bit nicer to kind of work with. If you wanted to see what's happening on some of these menus, some of these drop-down menus and things like that, we have this toggle, this nav bar toggle control that we use. So you can work in both worlds, right? In .NET, right, and in Visual Studio, what we do is when we see one page or one kind of, we have three different pages. One is the design page. We also have a designer page as well. We have the actual HTML page, the design page. And we also have the C# page, which is the coding. So Visual Studio allows developers to work on their specialty. One is the design specialist, one is a coding specialist, and one is the CSS specialist as far as style sheets and things like that, right? So each one can work on their own file. And once those files are done, they can all be brought together to give one kind of functional page. So basically, we've already created a little bit of an application just by creating a new project, just by creating a website, a web project, a web forms project. And we can see that as I change things, right, my demo app is now getting changed, right, in the thing. So this isn't public yet. This isn't out there on the web yet. We have to work locally on it and get it the way we want, and then we're going to publish it to a web server that's out there, and then that is published. So let's get out of the browser for a second because we don't need to compile it anymore. And let's bring up this page here. Let's kind of go down to the default page for a second. So if we look at the default page, this is what's bringing up our main, our main window that we see first. Okay. let's do something fun here. Let's create something called, my demo example, okay? And then let's change the text here to say, this is a test of a new form link, okay? Right? And let's put a button here or some kind of control that we want to bring up a new form that we're going to create, which we haven't done yet. But let's just put a link into the form we want to work on. Now, what we do is that we want to have some sort of ability to put new items in here, hyperlinks, images, drop downs, right? But we want to do it quickly. We want to do it we want to choose from a toolbox. So basically what we do is when we're in this form, we go to the toolbox section down here. And the toolbox now brings up all these different things, part of the .NET framework that we can work with. We can work with calendars. We can have checkboxes, and each one of these controls we can code so that it shows what we want in the data window. We can choose what we want to do with it once it's there. We can choose its behavior. We can choose how it behaves. When you hover over it, does it do one thing? When you go into it, does it do one thing? When you leave it, does it do another thing? Each one of these things in the properties section over here can be controlled. What we want to do in something like this is we want to just basically take something like a button, right? Let's just take a simple button that we want to put into our form, okay? Now remember, when we put these things in here, we're designing them for the world to see because they're going to be a website. So maybe you want to do something like a link, but a lot of times we're creating a program that's going to look more like a program. In other words, when we install, Oracle right now or PeopleSoft or something like that, we have all kinds of buttons and things like that. We also have the ability to build a really local intranet-based program that's really super functional. It doesn't have to be seen by millions of people, but it's also web-based inside of our own organization, okay? Think about the benefits of that. If you have a 1,000-person organization, not 8 million or not 8 billion even, but if you have just 1,000 people, running your internal applications like this is extremely beneficial because you don't have to update 1,000 machines. You can just update it once and everyone's got the update. So let's just say this button, okay, we're going to go to this button over here. I'm going to move my video window here. But let's just say we click on this button and we want this button to be called, we'll just say open calculator because we'll just do a simple one. This button now is going to open the calculator, okay? We don't have a calculator yet, we got to create it. Well, let's just say that we load this up and see what it's going to look like. Okay, this is the equivalent of compiling or running or testing or debugging in any other IDE. We start to see that, my demo example is popping up. We start to see that we have a few of the changes we have here. The name has changed. We changed that before. And now we have this button, right? We have this button that's showing up. And I'm hovering over it and it's highlighting. But when I click on it, nothing's happening. So it's changing my arrow to the finger and I am clicking on it, but nothing's happening. Why? It doesn't know. This is all HTML and ASP and framework stuff. This is just design stuff. It doesn't know what to do. So now we have to go to the C# code, right? So every web page and every object has code behind it. Optionally, you don't have to have code behind it, but when you click on it, when you click twice, when you click once, when you go in, when you highlight it or when you exit from it, you can do all this different code that happens. Okay, so if we bring up this page with this button here, what we do is we double click, right? And once we're in that particular file, that default.aspx.c# file, we're no longer looking at all the different HTML and ASP code. We're looking at the C# code. When we go into the C# code, you'll see this is looking very, very familiar, especially as CS students or IT students, that if you've ever programmed anything in Python or Java or anything like that, you start to see that this is the base levels of coding, right? We're bringing in all of our packages up here. We use something called using in C#, not import, or not include, like C++ is include and Java is import. But here we use using, right? So it's the same way. We're bringing in packages from the .NET framework that we want to interact with. We have a namespace. We have a partial class, which is our main class. And then inside of it, we have different methods. We have different methods. In this case, we have a method called button one click. So the button one that we created before, now this is the code button. Whatever we put inside this method, when we click that button, it's going to happen, okay? So what we can do is we can do something called a response.redirect, and we can put in an actual name of a new page. So let's put in calculator.aspx as our new page. And again, you'll be familiar with your little semicolons to enter to show a line stop and all things like that. So, and by the way, as you make errors, it will alert you to errors, and you can kind of click over here and see different quick actions to correct it, right? If you're not sure how to correct it, you can also notice that you'll see that there was a red line here. It's telling me there's a quote without an ending quote. And you get all kinds of different things that help you. If you noticed as I was typing, right, it's not only telling me all the different things I could bring up, but once I hit the period to give me all the sub routines, all the sub options, it also tells me which one it is in there. So I can actually really not only learn quickly here and see all the things I can do with these things, but it helps me to not make as many mistakes. Again, rapid application development. Companies want you to build an application as quickly and as accurately and as efficiently as possible and as robust as possible, and then they want you to release it to billions of users at one time, right? That's what they're looking for. So let's take a look at what this has done, right? If we go back to our default page, we have a button now that has been added, right? And now we put code behind that button. So now if we do it, okay, now what's going to happen is when we hover over it, it's now going to take me to another page. It took me to calculated.aspx. Why did we get an error? Because we didn't create calculated.aspx yet. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to say, all right, now let's create calculated.aspx. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go to project. We want to add a new item. Okay, if we add an existing item, we can add all kinds of different things from different files. We can add JavaScript we've already created. We could add images we've already created, videos. We could add sound bites. We could add all kinds of stuff to our project so it's all incorporated in one project. And then when we publish that project, all of those items that we've included in the project also get published to the web server at one time. So the benefit of having a project in Visual Studio's world is that anything included in that project, when we publish it, we're going to publish it to that web, right? To that web server. So we just kind of click at the end of this thing. When we make our changes, we do one button click and it sends it all to the web. Okay. So let's make a new item here. Let's create a web forms with a master page because we want to use our current master page that we use with the title bar, and we want to have another page underneath it, okay? And we're going to call this, what do you think we're going to call this? We're going to call this calculator.aspx, okay? And we're going to add this page. It's asking me what my master page is. We're using site mobile, site.master, okay? We can also have a site mobile. The way this works is that if somebody recognizes that if somebody loads up on an iPhone or an Android phone or a tablet, you can sense different things with the mobile master that you don't sense with the site master. In other words, you can say, are they using iOS? Then show it this way. Are they using a 800 by 600 resolution? Then show it that way. So you have all these different methods, so it shows up the right way all the time, no matter what device is in. You have great control, but you're not making 8 different apps for all the different operating systems and all the different devices. You're making one app one time, but you're coding it pretty swiftly so that it's sensing what the operating system is, sensing what the resolution is, and then making those changes. So we're going to choose Site Master here, and very simply with a little bit of coding up here as far as the showing what the actual inherits features are and what the actual placeholders are. When we go to design, we can see that this is including, right? It's a new page, but it's including our main master page, okay? So if I go to design right now and I put in, we're going to use a couple of different things here. So we're going to basically put in something called a panel. And once we create a panel, we can do different things with that panel. We can apply separate cascading style sheet to it so it shows up as a shadow or something like that. But once we're in a panel, everything inside that panel can be changed at the same time. If we turn a panel on or off, everything inside of it's turned off. It gives you great control over what you want the user to see and when. Otherwise, if you have 1,000 objects on your screen with drop downs and buttons and all that, you got to kind of highlight each one and make changes to each one. When you put them inside of a panel, you control the whole panel at the same time. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take this panel and we are going to, just for aesthetic purposes, we are going to justify it in the center. And what we're going to do is we're going to put in value 1, okay? We're going to put in value 2, and we're going to put in total, okay? Now we have to have some way for buttons to not just the terminology or the labels, we have to have a way to capture information from the user. So now we don't just put in labels, now we put in text boxes, right? If we look at a text box, We're going to put our text box 1 here. We're going to put our text box 2 here. And we need a third text box so that we can actually show, the total value, okay? Now, on top of that, if we want to do a calculator that's going to calculate 2 different numbers, we also want to have some sort of a button again that's going to allow us to show the total of value 1 and 2, the sum, the multiplication, the division, whatever you want to do. Something more complex is fine too. But basically now what we want to do is we want to put a button in here, okay? So with C#, we have control over every one of these objects, over the label, over the field, over the button, over the panel. With C#, we can make all these different things interact with each other just through code. We can change the backgrounds, we can change the colors, we can change the borders, we can change the shape and size or whatever, all dynamically based on the click of a button or the dependence of one item over another, all right? So it's completely up to your imagination with C# and .NET Framework to make this thing behave the way you want it to be for the user and for their experience. Keep in mind, when we do all these things, yeah, we're seeing them on our local machine, on a laptop, but once we publish it, all that behavior that you coded is now part of the 8 billion user experience. Now we have a new form called calculator. We have a master page that's going to show up and a menu that's going to show up on the top of the page. And now what we want to do is we want to collect this text box 1 value, this text box 2 value. We want to add them together, multiply them, whatever we want to do, and show them in text box 3. And we want it to happen when this button that we're going to call, we'll just call calculate, right? So let's just call this, let's just make it say calculate so it makes sense. When we do that, it's going to capture the 2 pieces of information from the user and add them together, okay? So let's go in here. This is the method for button 1 click. This is what's going to happen on this particular click. Now remember, this is a different button 1. This is button 1 of the calculator form. We did button 1 on the default ASPX form before. So we have a second button 1. Okay, and we can call it, you don't have to name a button 1, you can call it whatever you want. But what we're going to do is we're going to just basically say text box 1 dot text. Okay, and then we're going to say, we're going to put this as a string value. We're going to call this A. And because people are typing in text, we're going to have to capture it as text. Text box 2.text. Okay, that's string B. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to basically make text box 3 equal to A plus B. Okay. Okay, so we're making the text in text box 3 equal to the equivalent of A plus B. Now, let's take a look at what happens, but you should be thinking right now, wait a minute, these are numeric values we want to add. This is just going to concatenate them. You're absolutely right. Let's take a look at it. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to load up, and what you should see is that, first of all, if I go to home, this is my home page that we were showing. Now, when I go to open calculator, we got that error before, but now it's bringing up the calculator.aspx because it exists and it finds it. Now we're going to put in 5, 6, 7, and we're going to put in 4, 5, 6. And when we calculate this, we get a response, but it's not what we wanted, right? We're just getting a concatenation of the text of 1 and text of 2. And that's pretty cool. And you could do that with like merging names like, Michael P. Nizik or 121 Main Street. That's always useful. You can always concatenate those, and that's great. That's exactly how we do it. But we want to do numerical. We want to do calculations. So we have to make a few changes here to figure out how we're going to change this text that we're capturing into some sort of a numeric format, and then add those numeric formats together. That's what we're going to do now. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to basically set a couple of different new variables as doubles, right? We can use integer, we can use decimal, we can use all kinds of things, but in this case, we're just going to do a double. We're going to call it, we'll just do an X and Y for now. We're going to do a convert.to double. Okay, and then we're going to put in A, because that's the version we want to do that. Okay, and then we're going to do double. We're going to declare it as a double, type, and then we're going to do convert.to double. and we're going to do B. You see how easy it is in C# to convert text to numeric and numeric to text and so forth. Okay, we're going to set this to X plus Y, but we should get an error. And the reason we should get an error is that we can't inherently just take a text box and make it a numeric value, right? So what we're going to do is we're basically going to turn the numeric value of the sum or multiplication or whatever you want to do of these two double values now, X and Y. We're going to convert them back into text so we can show them and display them. So what we're going to do is we're just going to basically set text box 3.text into, basically going to say convert dot to we're going to convert this to a string, and then what we're going to do is we're basically going to do X plus Y. So now what we've done is we basically set text box 3 equal to the string value of the sum of those two numbers. Okay, so we basically built a little calculator, and we don't seem to have any bugs. And when we go to test this, right, we can be pretty confident that we're going to be able to add those two numbers together. Right, we'll see. So now we type in 456. Now we type in 789, and now we hit calculate, and now we get 1245. Okay, that calculation can be as massive and as complex as you want. No limits whatsoever with mathematical calculations, of course, in something like this. But essentially, what we've just done is we've created a web-based system, as basic as this sounds, in just a few minutes, really, that we can now make available to the world to use. Okay. If we solve the world's problems in some way with a piece of software and we do it in a 3-tier environment using an application platform like this, we can very rapidly and very easily make it available to the world in a quick period of time. That's what companies and organizations are looking for in you to be a .NET developer, because they want to be able to make these changes like that in their organization. Okay, so we've just seen the creation of a new project, the creation of a new form, the creating fields and creating text and creating functionality behind objects, and some usefulness that might actually come in handy for people to be able to use in the world. What we haven't seen is really, well, wait a minute, how do I actually take this, what I've just done, and make it available? Let's talk about that now. Let's talk about publishing. The first thing you want to be aware of is that there's something called IIS, Internet Information Systems, or server. You have Adobe as a web server. IIS is the leading web server for Microsoft platforms. Once you have a server established, you can create individual sites, and usually you have a default website, and you're going to put on those websites, you're going to put in the content that you've just created into that website. We have a web server that we use for these kind of demos and these kind of programs. So what we're going to do is we're going to create under this default website. Okay, so we've just created a new web application, and we've created a form, and we've created the text, we've created the fields, we've put some functionality behind it that's very useful, and we want to make it available to billions of users now, right, on the web in any different platform. We want to know whether they're using, as long as they're using a browser, we want them to be able to access it and run that calculator program, right? That would be our perfect world scenario. This next phase is that you should be asking yourself, how do I get what I just did, what I just created? How do I get that onto the internet so that people can see it? Okay, that's called publishing. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our local information. Once we've gone out to our own local browser, we've tested it, we've debugged it and everything. Now what we're going to do is basically going to go to the publishing piece and create this. Okay, so now that we've created an application, now what we're going to do is we're simply going to publish it. And the way we do that is we go to the Solution Explorer in .NET in Visual Studio. We go to the solution, we right-click, we go to Build Solution, and once we go to that compiles it. And once we go to My Demo, we go to Publish, and Publish asks you for how you want to publish this system. Okay. So once you get to this particular portion, you can pick whatever web server, web platform you have. If you're using Azure, if you're using AWS, if you're using Vario, if you're using GoDaddy, whatever your web hosting platform is that the world has access to, you're simply going to put in the different pieces of the publishing process, okay? If you have access to a particular web server, a web system, you're going to create a profile, and that profile will basically allow you to create something called web deploy package, FTP, which is file transfer protocol, or file system. Web deploy is usually what you're going to do, and you're going to put in your server name, the site name, the username and password that you're going to use. It will be your administrative password to that site. And then whatever the URL is that you're going to be looking at. Because sometimes what you have is you have a web server that has a root directory, but you have 3 or 4 subfolders in that you want to publish this particular piece to, right? Depending on how you do that, you set all these pieces up, and then once that's done, you're going to get an option to publish. And literally, as soon as you make your changes and you test them, you go to publish, you come to this site, you click the button publish, and that application becomes available in public and able to be run on the web to everybody in the world. That concept of publishing kind of concludes our 3-tier discussion and our application design for building applications in C# and ASP.NET. All right, we're going to finish up today, and I hope to see you at our new additional sessions. Again, we have sessions in Visual Studio, we have sessions in Python, in Java, in C#, SQL Server, and all kinds of things. So I hope you enjoyed this interest session, and I look forward to seeing you at the rest of our sessions.